Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Papua New Guinea, where he addressed the Forum of Indo-Pacific Islands Cooperation Summit. He also held bilateral talks with the Prime Minister James Marape today. The Indian Prime Minister arrived in the country on Sunday after attending the G7 summit in Hiroshima. Now, this is the first time an Indian Prime Minister is visiting Papua New Guinea. India and the United States are actively seeking to counter Beijing's influence in the Indo-Pacific. Papua New Guinea will sign a defense pact with the United States. The Defense Cooperation Agreement will give the U.S. troops access to the Pacific nations' ports and the airports. Now, the Pacific Island nation is strategically located close to trade routes to Australia and Japan. Washington and New Delhi are concerned that Beijing is now trying to woo these tiny nations with diplomatic and financial incentives. Now, the U.S. Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, will be holding separate talks with 14 Pacific leaders, including New Zealand Prime Minister Chris Hipkins. Meanwhile, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi landed in the nation's capital on Sunday night. Modi was met by gun salute and traditional dancers. Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister even extended his hands to touch Prime Minister Narendra Modi's feet. In Indian tradition, the gesture is meant to show respect to elders and receiving their blessings. As per the reports, China has been pouring in money into the countries in the Pacific. This has alarmed New Delhi and its allies in the Quad. New Delhi is increasing its engagement with Pacific Islands. This is due to their strategic location and fears that China could dominate the region. Modi also addressed the third summit of the Forum for Indo-Pacific Islands Cooperation, also known as FIPIC, which is currently underway as we speak. Post the summit, bilateral talks have also been scheduled between the participating countries.
आपकी तरह हम मल्टीलेटरलिज्म में विश्वास रखते हैं। फ्री, ओपन और इंक्लूसिव इंडो-पैसिफिक का समर्थन करते हैं। सभी देशों की संप्रभुता और अखंडता को सम्मान करते हैं। ग्लोबल साउथ की आवाज भी यूएन सुरक्षा परिषद में बुलंदी से उठनी चाहिए। इसके लिए अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संस्थाओं का सुधार हमारी साझा प्राथमिकता होनी चाहिए।
Now, after the summit, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will interact with scholars from the Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Programme before departing for Sydney, where he is scheduled to spend the next 2 days. Now, ahead of Prime Minister Modi's visit, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said that Australia and India share a commitment to a stable, secure and a prosperous Indo-Pacific. Together, we have an important role to play in supporting this vision. This is the first time that the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is visiting Australia since 2014. Prime Minister Modi will hold bilateral talks and will also meet with the Australian business leaders. He will return to India on Wednesday night. For more on this, we are now being joined by Principal Diplomatic Correspondent Siddhant Sibal. He's joining us live from Sydney. Hi Siddhant, good to see you. Now, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Papua New Guinea as we speak. He will be departing for Sydney in just a short while from now. What is planned for Modi in Australia, keeping in mind that the Quad Summit has been cancelled? What would be the significance of this trip?
Well, the key focus of the Indian Prime Minister in Australia will be the bilateral aspect. Now, there is no Quad meeting, and so far we have seen the multilateral aspect of the Indian Prime Minister's visit to Japan and Papua New Guinea. But in the bilateral component, that's here in Sydney, he will be meeting the Australian counterpart, the Australian Prime Minister, and also leading a mega diaspora event which is going to take place in Sydney. It is expected that approximately 20,000 Indians and Indian origin people are expected to participate in this diaspora event that's going to take place on Tuesday. But essentially, the meeting here in Sydney is going to reaffirm the strong relationship between India and Australia in terms of defense, security, trade. Last year we saw the Indian and the Australian side signing trade agreement. This is expected to widen into a larger free trade agreement. Also on the cards is the Indo-Pacific, something both India and Australia have been supporting. Essentially, it is a relationship that has a lot of convergences and of course is growing in almost every aspect. But there are thorny issues as well. One of course is the Khalistani violence. We know that India has been pressing Australia to take action against Khalistani extremists here in the country who have indulged in violence.
Right, Siddhant, you speak of the Indian diaspora in Sydney. I'm sure they're extremely excited to see Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. We also, just a short while ago, spoke about Modi's growing popularity. Talk to us about what kind of reception is expected for the Indian Prime Minister in Sydney later today.
Well, there is the diaspora popularity and then there is the leadership popularity. Let's talk about the diaspora popularity. We know that wherever the Indian Prime Minister travels to, he traveled to Japan. We saw the diaspora converging in huge numbers to welcome him. Similar case in Papua New Guinea. In Australia, I do expect as he lands at 8 p.m. local time, that's 3:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time, large number of Indian diaspora people are expected to welcome him. Something that has now become a norm, but essentially that's a diaspora event that's going to grab all the eyeballs. In fact, it's one of the lead stories here in Australian newspapers. Now, then there is, we have been talking about the leadership popularity. There was a small conversation between the leaders of India, Australia and the United States on the sidelines of the Quad meeting over the weekend in Hiroshima, in which both the American president and the Australian Prime Minister talked about how they have been inundated with requests to attend Prime Minister Narendra Modi's event, whether it's here in Sydney, the diaspora event, or whether it's next month, the state visit of the Indian Prime Minister to Washington. And for the state dinner, the US President has been getting a lot of requests that various sections of the society would like to attend that. But essentially this is something symbolic and testament to the Indian Prime Minister's growing popularity, whether it's the classes or the masses.
Right, Siddhant. Just to add to that, both Biden and Albanese said that they're facing a great challenge to accommodate prominent people who want to visit Modi where he's delivering a speech. But let's also talk about Prime Minister Modi's Papua New Guinea visit. Now, it's a first by any Indian Prime Minister. Help us understand as to why is Papua New Guinea so important in countering China's growing assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific region? And do you think that with the latest visit of Modi to Papua New Guinea, New Delhi has changed its policy towards the Indo-Pacific region?
Well, when it comes to the vision of free and open Indo-Pacific, the heart of this vision lies in the Pacific, and the 14 countries who form the Pacific Forum, the meeting with which the Indian Prime Minister had, play an important role geographically. And as the Indian Prime Minister used the term, these are not small island countries, they are large oceanic countries having large maritime spaces. So essentially, India is keen to engage with them given their strategic locations. In fact, a 12-point agenda has been announced by India, which includes capacity building in many of these countries, including a hospital in Fiji and other such infrastructure projects. Now, this area has seen increased geopolitical contestation, including, of course, by the Chinese who want to make inroads, including in the security aspect. Last year, we saw Solomon Islands signing a pact with the Chinese that raised alarm bells here in Australia, which sees the region as its neighborhood. And of course countries like the United States and of course India also getting worried over increased Chinese presence. So that is why the visit by the Indian Prime Minister is seen significant in every respect possible and is symbolic of India's increased engagement in the Pacific.
Right, Siddhant. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights with us. We'll of course be tracking Modi's Sydney visit very closely on WION. But thanks very much for joining us. Let's also now tell you more about the importance of Pacific Island countries and the Forum for Indo-Pacific Islands Cooperation. Now, the engagement with these 14 island countries is a part of India's Act East policy. Now, India has been engaging with these countries mainly through development assistance under South-South cooperation, and India's engagement with the Pacific Islands is a part of New Delhi's strategy to maneuver through the Indo-Pacific region. Another point is that it is also an important outreach to counter China's Indo-Pacific domination. In the past few months, we can see how China has been growing its assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, China has been growing its economic and military activity in the Indo-Pacific region. Just a few months ago, it also signed a pact with the Solomon Islands. Now, India will be extending assistance in the form of capacity building and loan assistance to these 14 island nations. And it's also important to note here that India is a member of Quad along with other countries, including United States of America, Japan, and Australia. Let's also now tell you more about growing India and Papua New Guinea ties. Now, just to add that there are 3,000 Indians living in Papua New Guinea as of now. And out of the governor of West New Province of Papua New Guinea is also of the Indian origin. Meanwhile, India's engagement with Papua New Guinea increased in trade and investment, considering the other aspects as well. Trade and investment are some of the two sectors where both India and Papua New Guinea have been extending their cooperation. Meanwhile, Indian companies are also buying projects coming in from Papua New Guinea.